going to do another video with a few other problems just to help you out. Okay, so this is the graph of all this information. So the y equals 3 minus x squared is the red graph. The x equals 0 is the green graph. The x equals 1 is this graph. And then revolving around this is that graph. And I'm just going to check something. Okay. So it should be revolving around the line y equals 2, so this. So if it's revolving around the y equals 2, it's revolving this way. So you can kind of think of it as kind of like revolving around the x-axis, but it was shifted up. Okay, so we're trying to revolve this little chunk right here. So it kind of makes this weird like cone. So that's two things around. Go like this. It looks something like that. Okay, so we're revolving something that looks kind of like that. And don't mind it, my 3D shape drawing is not the best. So the things we need to first figure out is where these 2 points are. Now, I think you can figure it out by just looking at it. But the question is, how can you algebraically do it? Well, it intersects the y value. Sorry, you're trying to figure out what points you are using, and it's 0 and it's 1. If you wanted to check what that was, you would plug in or set it equal to this equation and solve. So right here you'd say, okay, 2 equals, because it's where it intersects, and then 3 minus x squared, which will give you x equals plus or minus 1, which we're not obviously using the negative. Okay, so how do you find the volume? Well, the first question you need to figure out, is how is the radius figured out? So let's see. The radius from here to here, yes, is 2. But what's the radius in those other slivers? I don't know. So I'm going to make that slightly thinner. Okay. So to figure that out, when this equation is calculated, to get that point right there, okay, you got to use this equation. But we're taking away this chunk. So the y value gives us this distance, right? If we're talking about this point. But this point is taken away. This much of it's taken away. Well, what is that value? Well, that value is that 2. So my hint to you is if you are doing any problem above the x-axis, you're rotating it around a y equals some number line above the x-axis, you're going to basically subtract that said number from the equation that gets you there. So, and you can kind of see it with this right here. This chunk is figured out by the red equation minus this equation. So, the volume is going to equal, and you can just kick pi out right away, pi, and then you would do 3 minus x squared minus 2, and the radius is squared, and this is in terms of x, because it's like rotating around an x-axis that's shifted up. So then these values are x values. So you're going from 0 to 1. Okay, now to go through this, you would simplify it, and I'm not going to actually calculate it because I don't think I need to. And then that would simplify to 1 minus x squared dx, don't lose that squared. And then you would FOIL that, which gets you 1 minus 2x squared plus x to the 4th dx, and you can figure that out. Okay, on to the next graph. So you have, hold on, let's get these equations. You have, I don't even know if decimals will do this, x equals 2 minus y squared. Oops. Oh, it does. That's interesting. And then you have x equals 1. Okay, so that's what we're given. So let me take a picture of that. Okay. Let's put that into our thing so I can cheat and have a better looking picture than the one I can draw. Okay, so the black line is the equation given to us right here. And you're going to notice it says x equals. Well, my hint to you is once it says x equals, that means you're revolving around the y-axis, so things are different. Okay, so then it says that x equals 1. So it's bounded from here to here. So we have this little sector. Well, what shape does that make if it rotates this way? Well, it's actually going to make something like a weird sphere. So it's going to look something like this. Okay, so it's something like this. It's kind of like a sphere with a little bit of corner to it. Okay, so the question is, and you can see where this intersects. It's so easy, but if you needed to, you could calculate it. And so if you wanted to calculate it, you would take 2 minus y squared and set it equal to 1, because that's where it's intersecting, and you would solve for that, and it would get you y equals plus or minus 1, which we can clearly see there and there. So the question is, how do you find the volume? Well, it's v equals pi. Always kick the pi out. To find this, we're finding the radius from here to here, and we're going left to right because we're revolving around this x equals y1, x equals 1 line, and that's like taking the y-axis and shifting it over. So kind of like the similar to this, but now with y's. So how do you find this radius? Well, the radius is found by this equation, but it's subtracted by this red line, which is 1. So you would have 2 minus, wow, that's super thick. A little bit better. 2 minus y squared minus 1, that whole radius is squared, and dy. So you would at some point simplify it, and that would get you 1 minus y squared dy, and then it's basically just like the one above. It'd be 1 minus 2y squared plus y to the 4th dy. So not too bad. The question is, what's the restriction? Well, here on the equation before we did x values because we're in respect to x. Well, now here we're respect to y. So this thing is bounded from the lowest x or y value of -1 and the highest one of 1. So it's just -1 to 1. And then you could calculate this, but I'm not going to do it. Okay, so next equation, I goofed a little bit, and I want to change this to -2. So same equation, but we're going to revolve it around -2. So let's fix that on here, because we haven't done one on a negative side of something yet. So let's do that real quick. Okay. When you're on the positive part of revolving, like if you're revolving around the x or y, that did not change, did it? Did I do something wrong here? Oh, it's right there. Oops. When you're doing something like revolving around a line that's on the positive side, you're going to subtract. But when you're on the negative side, you're going to add, because you're subtracting a negative, so you're adding. So that's what's basically going to happen here. And I did not give myself enough room, hold on, to actually give you a visual of what's going to happen. So we need to do this. Okay, one more try. Okay. So this is basically, the same thing as what we just did, but just a little bit different method. Okay, so we have this sideways parabola, and that's because of this 2 minus y squared. We're revolving it around this line. So we're revolving it like this. So it's like revolving around the y-axis, just shifted over 2. Okay, and if we were to go ahead and make a 3D image of it, this moves over 4 digits, so this would be over here. So it's easier if I can turn my paper, but obviously I can't. It looks like a football. If you knew what Hey Arnold was, it would look like Hey Arnold's head, but I don't know if you know what the show Hey Arnold is. So it's this little image that looks kind of like a weird football or a rugby ball. Okay, so we got to figure out the volume. Okay, so volume equals pi. Well, what's the radius? Well, the radius is figured out, since we're going this way, it's going to be figured out from here to here. Wow, that's really crooked. All right, so this chunk from here to here is figured out by this equation. But this chunk is figured out by the 2. Remember in like algebra 2 and pre-calculus, we said like if we moved 2, we added 2. But if we went right, we subtracted. Well, it's kind of the same concept. So we have to add 2 to get to that distance, because there's no way to get to that distance without adding 2. So we take the equation 2 minus y squared, and we're actually going to add 2 this time. So if you're on the negative side of the axis, or down here, you would add, but if you're on the positive, you would subtract, basically. And since we're going against this vertical line, it's dy. And then the question is, what is the boundaries? What's from -2 to 2? So you would just simplify, and if you put this together, the 2 and 2 become 4. So I'm going to write that. This is what you would have squared. So if you ended up foiling it out, you would get 16 8y squared and y to the 4th dy, and then you would go ahead and solve it. So that's pretty much the gist of it. So I'll give some more examples that aren't on your notes just to help out if you need it.